Today, we embark on an incredible journey through the story of Joshua, a leader whose faith and courage helped shape the destiny of an entire nation. Joshua's journey is not just a tale of battles and victories. It is a story of faith in action, unwavering devotion, and the challenges of building a community that honors God. From the first steps out of Egyptian slavery to the conquest of the Promised Land, Joshua's life teaches us profound lessons about trust, leadership, and perseverance. Join us as we explore how this remarkable leader navigated the trials before him, transforming a group of wandering tribes into a nation chosen by God. In a time when courage was as precious as gold, there emerged a man whose legacy would echo throughout the ages: Joshua, son of Nun. Born into the oppressive heat of Egyptian slavery, Joshua grew up amidst a people longing for freedom. It was in these times of despair, amidst the cries of labor and the relentless demands of their taskmasters, that Joshua's character began to take shape. From the beginning, he was different. A young man full of promise, courage, and unwavering faith. He was destined not just to witness the liberation of his people, but to lead them into the fulfillment of a divine promise. Joshua's story is one of transformation. Initially, he was Hosea, a young man from the tribe of Ephraim. But Moses, seeing in him a spark that others might not have noticed, changed his name to Joshua, meaning Yahweh is salvation. It was a name that foreshadowed the role he would play in leading his people out of wandering and into their inheritance. Joshua learned by following Moses, the great liberator of Israel. He was Moses' assistant, his trusted lieutenant, and, through their long journey, Joshua witnessed the miracles that defined the fate of his people. The parting of the Red Sea, the manna falling from heaven, and the waters flowing from the rock, these were not just distant acts of divine power. Joshua stood in the midst of it all, each event deepening his faith and preparing him for the leadership ahead. One of Joshua's earliest tests came during the battle with the Amalekites. While Moses stood atop a hill with the staff of God raised, Joshua led the charge on the battlefield. He fought with valor, proving that his strength was more than physical. It was spiritual, drawing power from the Almighty's presence. This experience would become a hallmark of his leadership: strategic brilliance combined with an unshakable dependence on God. Joshua's courage and dedication on the battlefield did not go unnoticed, and it set the stage for the greater responsibilities he would soon shoulder. Perhaps one of the most defining moments in Joshua's journey was his role as one of the 12 spies sent to explore Canaan, the land promised to their forefathers. This mission was not just about reconnaissance, it was about testing the very core of their faith. The land of Canaan was rich and fertile, described as flowing with milk and honey, but it was also inhabited by powerful nations, with fortified cities and fearsome giants. Joshua and his fellow spy Caleb were the only ones who returned with optimism. They saw not the giants nor the fortified cities, but the possibilities of God's promises fulfilled. Their report stood in stark contrast to the fear-filled murmurs of the other 10 spies. "If the Lord is pleased with us," Joshua declared, "he will lead us into this land." It was not a naive statement, but one born of certainty, an unwavering confidence that God could and would deliver what he had promised. But the people, consumed by fear, rebelled. The sight of the giants and the fortified cities filled them with dread, and they doubted God's ability to fulfill his promise. They refused to enter Canaan, and their punishment was harsh. They were condemned to wander in the desert for 40 years, a generation that would not see the promised land. Only Joshua and Caleb, steadfast in their faith, were assured that they would one day enter it. Those years of wandering were not wasted for Joshua. They were years of growth, years in which he learned to lead, to bear the burdens of a people prone to doubt and rebellion. It was preparation, divine and necessary for the mantle he was soon to carry. During these years, Joshua observed Moses closely. He watched as Moses dealt with the people's complaints, their fears, and their failures. Joshua saw the weight of leadership, the lonely moments when Moses would intercede for the people, pleading for God's mercy. He saw the patience required to lead those who often seemed determined to go astray. Through it all, Joshua learned that true leadership was not about power or prestige. It was about service, sacrifice, and an unyielding commitment to God's will. These lessons forged Joshua into a leader who was not only courageous, but also compassionate and wise. Moses, the great leader of Israel, eventually reached the end of his journey. He was not to enter the promised land himself, and it was Joshua who was chosen to take up the mantle. The transition of leadership was neither abrupt nor unplanned. Moses had spent years mentoring Joshua, sharing his wisdom, his fears, and his hopes. Before all of Israel, Moses laid his hands on Joshua, a gesture rich in symbolism, a transfer of authority, responsibility, and divine blessing. But the ultimate affirmation came from God himself. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous." These words, spoken directly to Joshua, were not just a commission. They were a promise. The weight of this responsibility must have been immense. Joshua was stepping into the shoes of a man who had confronted Pharaoh, parted the Red Sea, and led a nation through the wilderness. Yet Joshua's leadership was marked by humility and a deep sense of responsibility. He did not see himself as Moses' replacement, but as a servant, continuing the work begun by his predecessor. His task was daunting, leading a people, often rebellious and fearful, into unknown territory filled with formidable enemies. Yet Joshua knew he was not alone. The presence of the Almighty, who had guided them by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, would be with him every step of the way. Joshua's first act as the new leader was to prepare the people to cross the Jordan River. He moved among the tribes, giving orders, encouraging them, reminding them of God's promises. He told them to consecrate themselves, for the Lord was about to do amazing things among them. Joshua understood that the success of their journey did not depend solely on military strength or strategy. It depended on their relationship with God, their readiness to trust him completely. The first great test of Joshua's leadership came as they stood on the banks of the Jordan River, with the Promised Land on the other side. It was the season of flooding, and the river raged, an impassable barrier between the people and their destiny. The Jordan River, swollen with spring rains, was a formidable obstacle. Its currents were swift and its waters deep. To the people, it must have seemed an impossible challenge, but Joshua was undeterred. He commanded the priests to carry the Ark of the Covenant and step into the river. It was an act of profound faith, to step forward before the miracle, to trust in what was yet unseen. And then it happened. As soon as their feet touched the water, the river stopped flowing. The waters piled up, leaving a dry path through which the entire nation crossed. This crossing was more than just a passage from one side to another. It was a symbolic transition from wandering to inheritance, from the past to the future. It was a moment that mirrored the parting of the Red Sea, a reminder to the people that the same God who had delivered them from Egypt was now bringing them into the land he had promised. Joshua instructed 12 men to take stones from the middle of the river and build a memorial. "When your children ask, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant." Joshua understood the importance of remembrance, of passing down the stories of God's faithfulness from generation to generation. This was not just their story, it was a story that would shape their identity for centuries to come. The memorial stones were a tangible reminder of God's power and faithfulness. They were a testament to future generations that their journey was not by their own strength, but by the hand of God. Joshua wanted the people to remember that every step they took in the Promised Land was a step made possible by divine intervention. This act of remembrance was crucial for a people who, time and again, had shown how easily they could forget the works of God. By establishing this memorial, Joshua was ensuring that the story of God's faithfulness would be told and retold, anchoring their identity as a people chosen and sustained by God. Soon after crossing the Jordan, Joshua faced the challenge of conquering Jericho, a city fortified with seemingly impenetrable walls. Jericho was not just any city, it was a symbol of the obstacles that stood between the Israelites and their inheritance. The walls of Jericho were massive, built to withstand any siege, and the people inside were prepared for a long standoff. The strategy God provided was unconventional. Instead of a direct assault, Joshua was instructed to have the people march around the city once a day for 6 days, with the priests blowing trumpets and carrying the Ark of the Covenant. On the seventh day, they were to march around the city 7 times and then give a great shout. It must have seemed strange, even absurd, to the people of Jericho, who watched from behind their walls. They must have wondered what kind of battle tactic this was, marching and trumpeting without any sign of aggression. But Joshua obeyed without question, and the people followed. On the 7th day, after the 7th circuit around the city, the trumpet sounded, and Joshua commanded the people to shout. The walls of Jericho fell not by the force of human hands, but by the power of God. It was a victory that demonstrated both God's might and the power of obedience. Jericho's fall was the beginning of the conquest of Canaan, a sign to both the Israelites and the surrounding nations that God was with Joshua and his people. This victory was not just a military triumph. It was a spiritual statement. It showed that the battles ahead would not be won by conventional means, but by trusting in God's guidance. The Israelites were learning that their strength lay not in their numbers or their weapons, but in their relationship with God. The fall of Jericho was a reminder that when they followed God's instructions, no matter how unusual, they would experience His power in ways beyond human understanding. Joshua's journey was not without setbacks. After the victory at Jericho, the Israelites faced defeat at Ai due to disobedience within their camp. One man, Achan, had taken items from Jericho that were meant to be devoted to God, and this act of disobedience brought consequences upon the entire community. Joshua, upon discovering the truth, acted decisively. He understood that leadership required both compassion and a firm commitment to uphold God's commands. The people had to be purified, and only then could they move forward to claim further victories. This incident was a powerful lesson for Joshua and the Israelites. It underscored the importance of holiness and the seriousness with which God viewed disobedience. Joshua learned that even a single act of disobedience could jeopardize the entire community. It was a reminder that their success in the Promised Land was directly tied to their faithfulness to God. Joshua's handling of the situation demonstrated his unwavering commitment to maintaining the integrity of the community and ensuring that God's standards were upheld. Joshua also oversaw the circumcision of the new generation at Gilgal, renewing the covenant that had been made with their ancestors. The previous generation, which had left Egypt, had failed to circumcise their children during the years of wandering. Now, on the threshold of a new beginning, it was time to reaffirm their identity as God's chosen people. He led the celebration of the Passover, marking the first time they celebrated it in the Promised Land. These acts were not just rituals. They were profound spiritual renewals, reminders of who they were and to whom they belonged. They were declarations that the people of Israel were set apart, that they were in covenant with the Almighty, and that their journey was part of a greater divine narrative. Joshua's leadership in battle was marked by strategy, courage, and above all, faith in God's guidance. He led the Israelites in a series of campaigns to conquer both the southern and northern regions of Canaan. These campaigns were not without their challenges. The land of Canaan was occupied by numerous city-states, each with its own king and army. The Israelites were facing well-trained soldiers, fortified cities, and alliances formed to resist their advance. Yet Joshua moved forward with confidence, knowing that victory was assured not by military might, but by divine promise. When 5 Amorite kings joined forces against Gibeon, a city that had made peace with Israel, Joshua led a surprise attack. The battle was fierce, but Joshua's faith never wavered. In one of the most extraordinary events recorded, Joshua prayed and the sun stood still over Gibeon, giving the Israelites time to achieve a complete victory. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. This event was not just a military victory, but a divine affirmation of Joshua's role as the chosen leader. It was a demonstration that God was fighting for Israel, that He was actively involved in their battles, and that He would move heaven and earth to fulfill His promises. Joshua's approach to these conquests was always rooted in obedience. He followed God's instructions precisely, destroying cities when commanded, sparing those like Rahab who had shown faith, and ensuring that the people did not take for themselves what belonged to God. His obedience extended beyond the battlefield into the very fabric of how the land was to be divided and settled. Joshua understood that the conquest of Canaan was not just about military victory. It was about establishing a community that lived under God's rule, a society that reflected his justice, mercy, and holiness. After the major battles had been won, Joshua faced a new challenge, dividing the land among the tribes of Israel. This was not merely an administrative task, but the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Each tribe was to receive their inheritance, and Joshua ensured that the division was conducted fairly, with respect for the guidance God provided. The process of dividing the land was meticulous, involving surveys and the casting of lots to determine the boundaries of each tribe's territory. This method ensured that the division was seen as coming from God, not from human favoritism or manipulation. The tribe of Levi, set apart for priestly duties, received no contiguous territory but were given cities scattered throughout the land. This ensured that the Levites, those responsible for spiritual leadership, were present among all the tribes. Joshua also honored the request of the daughters of Zelophehad, granting them their father's inheritance, setting a precedent for the rights of women in Israelite society. This act was a significant step in ensuring justice and fairness, showing that God's promises were for all his people, regardless of gender. Joshua's leadership was characterized by a deep commitment to justice, ensuring that every family received their portion and that no one was overlooked. He understood that the distribution of the land was crucial for the unity and stability of the nation. The land was not just a place to live, it was a tangible sign of God's promise, a reminder that they were a people set apart for his purposes. By ensuring that each tribe received its inheritance, Joshua was helping to lay the foundation for a society built on God's covenant promises. As Joshua's life drew to a close, he gathered all the leaders of Israel at Shechem. It was a solemn occasion, a time to reflect on all that God had done for them. Joshua recounted their history, from the call of Abraham to their deliverance from Egypt, from the wandering in the desert to the victories in Canaan. He reminded them that it was God who had fought for them, God who had given them the land they now possessed. Joshua wanted them to understand that their success was not due to their own strength or wisdom, but because of God's faithfulness. Joshua then issued a challenge. "Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." It was a call to commitment, a reminder that their journey was not just about conquering land, but about remaining faithful to the one who had brought them this far. The people responded with enthusiasm, pledging their loyalty to God. Joshua made their covenant official, writing it in the book of the law and setting up a stone as a witness to their promise. Joshua's legacy was not just the land he helped conquer, it was the faith he inspired in others. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him. His influence extended beyond his years, shaping the nation long after he was gone. Joshua showed that true leadership is not about personal power, but about obedience to God, courage in the face of fear, and a willingness to serve others. His story continues to inspire, reminding us that with faith and perseverance, we too can overcome the obstacles before us and step into the promises God has for our lives. Joshua's final words were not merely a farewell. They were a charge to the people to remain steadfast in their faith. He understood the human tendency to forget, to grow complacent, and he wanted to ensure that the people would continue to walk in obedience to God even after he was gone. The stone he set up at Shechem was more than a memorial. It was a witness against them, a reminder of the covenant they had made. Joshua's concern was not just for the present generation, but for future generations, that they too would know the Lord and serve him faithfully. Joshua's life is a powerful testament to what God can do through a person who is fully committed to him. From a young man in Egypt to the leader of a nation, Joshua's journey was one of faith, courage, and unwavering obedience. He faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, yet he never wavered in his trust in God. His story is a reminder that true success is not measured by personal achievements, but by faithfulness to God's calling. Joshua's legacy is one of hope, courage, and the enduring power of God's promises. Joshua had led the people through incredible victories and moments of divine intervention, but the conquest of Canaan was only the beginning of a much larger task. Now Joshua faced perhaps his greatest challenge, establishing the foundation of a nation that would serve God faithfully in the Promised Land. This was a land rich with potential, but also fraught with challenges. A land that had seen war, conquest, and divine miracles. It was now time to turn from a conquering people into a settled, thriving society that could carry forward the divine covenant. After the main battles were over, Joshua ensured the Israelites established themselves in the territories they had been given. But life in Canaan wasn't simply about land acquisition. It was about nation building. The people needed to transform from a wandering tribe into a unified nation with a shared identity, purpose, and loyalty to God. The success of Israel in Canaan wasn't just about taking possession of land, it was about establishing a culture that honored God. Joshua knew this well, and it was this mission that drove him in his final years. The division of the land among the 12 tribes was a defining moment for Israel. Joshua meticulously ensured that each tribe received their allotted inheritance, adhering to the instructions given by Moses and guided by divine wisdom. The distribution was not only an administrative necessity, but also a deeply spiritual act, a realization of God's promise to Abraham centuries earlier. Joshua was keenly aware that the tribes needed to see their portion of land as more than just territory. It was a gift from God, a fulfillment of his promises, and a sign of their unique relationship with him. But the challenges of establishing the nation did not end with the division of the land. The tribes were not yet unified as a single cohesive nation. Each tribe had its own leaders, its own distinct territory, and its own challenges. Joshua knew that unity was crucial if the Israelites were to maintain their identity and continue in their calling to be God's chosen people. He worked tirelessly to ensure that the tribes would support one another, respect each other's boundaries, and uphold the covenant they had made with God. One of the pivotal moments during Joshua's leadership came with the Gibeonite deception. The Gibeonites, aware of the Israelites' victories and fearing for their survival, devised a plan to deceive Joshua and the leaders of Israel. They dressed in worn-out clothes, carried moldy bread, and approached Joshua, pretending to have come from a distant land. Without consulting God, Joshua made a treaty with them, promising to spare them. It was only later that the Israelites discovered the deception. The Gibeonites were actually neighbors, inhabitants of the very land Israel had been commanded to conquer. This incident was a profound lesson for Joshua and the people. It underscored the importance of seeking God's guidance in every decision, no matter how straightforward it might seem. Joshua's failure to inquire of the Lord before making a treaty resulted in consequences that would reverberate for generations. The Gibeonites became servants within Israel, and while they were spared, their presence was a constant reminder of the importance of consulting God in all matters. Joshua accepted responsibility for the oversight, and rather than breaking the covenant, which would have dishonored God, he honored the agreement, showing his integrity and commitment to God's commands, even when the outcome was less than ideal. This episode also highlighted Joshua's humility. A lesser leader might have tried to cover up the mistake or shift blame to others, but Joshua faced it directly. He acknowledged the error and found a way to honor both God and the agreement he had made. Through this experience, Joshua taught the Israelites that leadership was not about infallibility, but about faithfulness, humility, and making things right when mistakes were made. It was a lesson in leadership that would shape the character of the nation as they moved forward. Although the major conquests had ended, there were still regions within Canaan that needed to be subdued. The land was vast, and many areas remained under the control of the local inhabitants. Joshua encouraged the tribes to be diligent, to continue the work of driving out the remaining pockets of resistance, and to fully claim the inheritance that God had given them. He reminded them that the task was not complete, that complacency could lead to future troubles, and that they needed to trust in God's promise that he would be with them in completing this mission. Joshua had seen firsthand how easily the people could lose sight of their purpose. He had witnessed their fear when faced with giants, their tendency to grumble during difficult times, and their quickness to doubt. Therefore, Joshua's final years were dedicated not only to guiding the people militarily, but also spiritually. He knew that their success in the land depended not just on their strength or their weapons, but on their fidelity to God. His leadership during these later years was marked by a deep commitment to ensuring that the people understood their dependence on God for all things. The victories under Joshua's leadership were monumental, but they were not an end in themselves. They were part of a larger narrative, a divine story of God establishing a people for himself. Joshua's battles were not only against physical enemies, but also against the forces of complacency, fear, and disobedience. His leadership was a call to arms not just in warfare, but in devotion to God. He repeatedly urged the Israelites to remain steadfast, to remember that the land they were inhabiting was a gift, a fulfillment of a promise, and that their continued prosperity depended on their adherence to the covenant. As Joshua grew older, he sensed the importance of reaffirming the people's commitment to God. He gathered all the tribes of Israel at Shechem, a location rich with historical and spiritual significance. It was at Shechem that God had first promised Abraham that his descendants would inherit the land. Now, standing in that same place, Joshua reminded the people of all that God had done for them. From the calling of Abraham to the deliverance from Egypt, from the miracles in the wilderness to the victories in Canaan. Joshua's speech was a powerful reminder of God's faithfulness throughout generations. Joshua recounted the wonders and the covenant promises, urging the people to remain true to the God who had never abandoned them. He did not shy away from reminding them of the consequences of disobedience. His message was clear. Their continued success in the Promised Land was directly tied to their faithfulness to God. Joshua's words carried the weight of experience, the authority of a leader who had walked alongside Moses, who had witnessed the highs and lows of Israel's journey, and who had himself experienced both victory and failure. In one of the most memorable moments of his leadership, Joshua challenged the people to choose whom they would serve. The gods their ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, the gods of the Amorites in whose land they were living, or the Lord who had brought them out of Egypt. "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord," Joshua declared. It was a defining moment, a line drawn in the sand. The people responded with a resounding affirmation, pledging to serve the Lord and forsake all other gods. This covenant renewal at Shechem was more than just a ceremony. It was a spiritual milestone for the nation. Joshua understood that the greatest threat to Israel was not the external enemies they faced, but the internal temptation to drift away from God. He knew that the heart of the nation had to be anchored in the covenant if they were to thrive in the land they had been given. The stone set up at Shechem served as a witness to the promises made that day, a tangible reminder of the covenant relationship between God and his people. Joshua's final days were spent in quiet reflection and in ensuring that the people were well prepared for life without him. He had led them faithfully, but he knew that his time was coming to an end. He had seen how easily the people could turn away from God when left to their own devices, and he wanted to do everything in his power to prepare them for the challenges ahead. Joshua's concern was not for his own legacy, but for the spiritual well-being of the nation. He reminded the leaders of their responsibilities, urging them to be strong and courageous, just as he had been encouraged by Moses and God. He called upon them to uphold justice, to care for the vulnerable, and to lead the people in righteousness. Joshua's leadership was not about consolidating power or ensuring his name would be remembered. It was about empowering others to carry forward the mission that God had given them. He wanted the nation to thrive long after he was gone, to be a light among the nations, a people set apart for God's purposes. Joshua died at the age of 110, and he was buried in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim. The Bible records that Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. This statement is a powerful testament to Joshua's influence. His leadership had left an indelible mark on the nation, guiding them not only in battle, but in faith. Joshua's legacy was not one of conquest alone. It was a legacy of faithfulness, courage, and unwavering obedience to God. He had taken the mantle from Moses and had completed the mission, leading the people into the promised land and helping them take possession of it. He had taught them that their true strength lay not in their numbers or their military prowess, but in their relationship with God. He had shown them that obedience to God's commands brought blessings, while disobedience brought consequences. Through his life, Joshua exemplified what it meant to be a servant leader, one who leads not for personal gain, but for the glory of God and the good of his people. Joshua's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of faith in action. He was a man who believed in God's promises and acted on that belief, even when the path was uncertain or the obstacles seemed insurmountable. His courage was not the absence of fear, but the presence of faith that God would be true to his word. Joshua's leadership was characterized by a willingness to step into the unknown, to take risks because he knew that God was with him. His faith was practical, evident in every decision he made, every battle he fought, and every word of encouragement he gave to the people. Joshua's life also underscores the importance of preparation. He spent years as Moses' assistant, learning, observing, and growing. He was not thrust into leadership unprepared. He was shaped by his experiences, molded by the challenges he faced, and equipped by God for the task ahead. His story teaches us that great leadership often begins in the shadows, in the quiet places of preparation where character is forged and faith is deepened. Joshua's humility, his willingness to serve, and his readiness to learn were all key factors in his effectiveness as a leader. Moreover, Joshua's story highlights the significance of obedience. Time and again, he demonstrated that true success comes from following God's commands, even when those commands defy human logic. Marching around Jericho for 7 days might not have made sense from a military perspective, but Joshua obeyed, and God delivered the victory. His life was a testament to the truth that God's ways are higher than our ways, and that trust in him leads to outcomes beyond what we could achieve on our own. Joshua's leadership also emphasizes the value of legacy. He understood that his role was not just to lead the people for a season, but to prepare them for the future. He invested in the next generation, ensured that the covenant was renewed, and left behind tangible reminders of God's faithfulness. The memorial stones, the written covenant, the cities of refuge, all of these were part of Joshua's legacy, tools to help the people remember who they were and whose they were. His life challenges us to consider what kind of legacy we are leaving for those who come after us. Are we investing in others, preparing them to carry forward the mission, and leaving behind markers of God's faithfulness? Joshua's journey from a young man in Egyptian slavery to the leader of Israel in the Promised Land is a story of transformation, courage, and faith. It is the story of a man who trusted God with everything, who was willing to stand against the majority, to lead a people through impossible circumstances, and to do so with humility and strength. His journey was not without its challenges, its moments of doubt, or its setbacks. But through it all, Joshua remained steadfast in his devotion to God. The impact of Joshua's leadership extended far beyond his lifetime. He laid the foundation for the nation of Israel in Canaan, established a culture of remembrance, and fostered a spirit of unity and devotion that would influence generations to come. His life stands as a testament to what God can do through someone who is fully committed to his purposes. Joshua showed that true greatness is found not in personal achievement or power, but in faithful obedience and service to God. Joshua's story challenges us to reflect on our own lives. What battles are we facing? And how are we relying on God's strength to overcome them? What promises has God given us? And are we stepping forward in faith to claim them? Are we preparing the next generation, investing in others, and leaving behind a legacy that points to God's faithfulness? Just as Joshua led the people into the Promised Land, we too are called to lead in our spheres of influence, to trust in God's promises and to walk in obedience to his word. In the end, Joshua's life was a journey of faith, courage, and unwavering devotion to God. He was a servant leader, a conqueror, and a shepherd of his people. His story is a powerful reminder that with God, all things are possible, and that a life lived in obedience to Him is a life that leaves an enduring impact on the world. As we consider Joshua's journey, may we be inspired to live with the same courage, faith, and commitment, trusting that God will lead us into the promises He has for each of us. We hope Joshua's story has inspired you as much as it has inspired countless others over generations. What lessons from Joshua's journey resonate most with you? We would love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Your perspective might just be the encouragement someone else needs today. If you enjoyed this exploration of faith, courage, and leadership, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Together, let's continue to grow in faith and seek the promises God has for each of us. May you be blessed and strengthened on your own journey, just as Joshua was. Until next time, stay courageous and stay faithful.